and behaviors in your relationship with your money. You don't have to save it all and you don't have to spend it all either. There's a good balance in between. If you have a story about a financial goal that you're aiming for, do get in touch with us. You can email us at this address.
CNA recently celebrated our Silver Jubilee with an event that gathered prominent figures from across the region.
Today, CNA has established itself in 29 territories, bringing the Asian perspective to tens of millions of viewers across the region.
As we mark 25 years of service, we are working on new initiatives to grow our existing base, meet new needs, and reach out to new audiences.
The night was filled with lively conversations and a shared sense of pride in CNA's achievements.
I certainly wish that CNA after 25 years can go from strength to strength. I think continue fiercely to invest in your efforts to do reporting from an Asian perspective and really double your presence on the ground so that we can get more deep coverage.
So beyond the hard news, I really enjoy the documentaries, many of which are award-winning. As someone who originates from outside this region, it's a great way to culturally assimilate and understand the global developments from an Asian lens. So thank you for expanding my perspectives.
I'm sure CNA will continue to thrive in the future, embracing innovation and digital transformation, and yet staying true to its focus of bringing fresh and trusted perspective.
As CNA embarks on our next chapter, one thing remains certain: our dedication to bringing Asia to the world. Is Asia First.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock here in Singapore. I'm Arnold Gay. The headlines this hour: Israel vows to exact the price from Iran for the unprecedented overnight barrage of drone and missile strikes, even as it faces international pressure to de-escalate. The Biden administration tells Benjamin Netanyahu to think carefully about any retaliation. G7 leaders walk a fine line, calling on Tehran to exercise restraint and pledging to work towards an immediate and sustainable ceasefire in Gaza amid concerns of a wider regional conflict.
Because we have deliberations with our partners, we are considering all options, and I'm quite confident that we will take the necessary steps that are necessary to protect and defend our people. We are not war seekers. I think I would leave it at that.
I'm Sarah Alcalde with Business News. I'll bring you the market reaction as tensions rise in the Middle East and as investors weigh the risk of an Israeli retaliation. Oil falling slightly at the start of trade, although analysts expect crude prices to gain as the region accounts for 40% of global exports. Any impact on shipping also closely watched, with Iran threatening to shut down the world's single most important oil passageway, the Strait of Hormuz. Plus, in focus this week, China's economic scorecard as it struggles to energize domestic demand and cope with a persistent property slump.
I'm Elizabeth Neo. Balancing trade and geopolitical concerns, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz begins his China visit as Berlin seeks to de-risk its relationship with Beijing. There is growing scrutiny over Chinese EV exports flooding European markets. Plus, Germany also wants China's support in influencing Russia amid the war in Ukraine. Well, with 19 people killed and more missing after a landslide in the central Indonesian island of Sulawesi. Heavy rains and damage to roads into the affected areas complicate rescue efforts.
Accelerating climate action. I'm Julie Yu, live at the Ecosperity Week in Singapore. It's an annual flagship sustainability event, and we'll be hearing from the representatives of businesses, academia, and governments throughout the day.
The G7 group of countries has condemned Iran's first ever direct strikes on Israel and warned they risk provoking an uncontrollable escalation in the Middle East.
Calls for restraint have come in from global powers and Arab nations amid fears of an open warfare erupting between the regional rivals. Leaders of the G7 countries have offered their full support to Israel and say they are ready to take more measures in response to further destabilizing initiatives.
It's 10 o'clock here in Singapore. Good morning. You're watching CNA. The headlines this hour: Israel vows to exact a price from Iran for the unprecedented overnight barrage of drone and missile strikes, even as it faces international pressure to de-escalate. G7 leaders walking a fine line, calling on Tehran to exercise restraint and pledging to work towards an immediate and sustainable ceasefire in Gaza amid concerns of a wider regional conflict.
The Middle East is on the brink. The people of the region are confronting a real danger of a devastating full-scale conflict. Now is the time to defuse and de-escalate. Now is the time for maximum restraint.
Asia-Pacific markets are trading low as investors weigh the impact of Iran's aerial attack on Israel. Investor attention will also be on China this week as the country unveils its economic growth scorecard amid a persistent property slump. Balancing trade and geopolitical concerns, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has begun his China visit, with Berlin seeking to de-risk its relationship with Beijing as growing scrutiny over Chinese EV exports flooding European markets. Plus, Germany also wants China's support in influencing Russia amid the war in Ukraine. The United Nations has called for greater humanitarian assistance to aid refugees and displaced people fleeing Sudan. The nation is marking 1 year since fighting tore through the capital, triggering widespread displacement and deepening the hunger crisis. And at least 19 people killed and 2 others are missing after a landslide in the central Indonesian island of Sulawesi. Heavy rains and damage to roads into the affected areas are complicating rescue efforts. And that is the latest from the CNA newsroom.
This is Asia Now.
Good morning. It's 11 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 8:30 in New Delhi and 10 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Yasmin Yonkers. At this hour, Israel on high alert as it weighs its response to Iran's attack. The U.S. says it will not take part in any retaliatory strikes. Global powers, including Israel's allies, urge restraint to avert a wider war. Iran says it warned its allies and neighbors about the aerial attack on Israel 72 hours before launching the weapons, but the U.S. denies this. Olaf Scholz seeks to de-risk Germany's relationship with Beijing. His visit to China comes amid a probe into claims of unfair competition involving Chinese EVs in European markets. Also on the German leader's agenda, a meeting with President Xi Jinping.
I'm Julie Yu, live from Ecosperity Week in Singapore, where the spotlight is on inspiring climate action and driving innovation to restore the Earth. Now, coming up, we delve into the journey of the first person to walk to both the North and South Poles and his mission to preserve Antarctica.
Well, tensions in the Middle East are running high as Israel weighs its response to an unprecedented attack by Iran. The U.S. says it will not take part in any potential Israeli counteroffensive against Iran. In fact, reports say that the majority of members of the Israeli war cabinet favor a response to the attack. Hello there, updating this hour's top stories. Israel is on high alert as it weighs its response to Iran's attack. The US says it will not take part in any retaliatory strikes. Global powers, including Israel's allies, urge restraint to avert a wider war. Iran says it warned its allies and neighbors about the aerial attack on Israel 72 hours before launching the weapons, but the US denies this. Olaf Scholz seeks to de-risk Germany's relationship with Beijing. His visit to China comes amid a probe into claims of unfair competition involving Chinese EVs in European markets. Also on the German leader's agenda, a meeting with President Xi Jinping. And global business leaders, policymakers and sustainability experts have convened in Singapore for Eco-Prosperity Week. That is a gathering that's focused on inspiring action and fostering innovation in environmental protection. And Julie Yu is there with a guest who's intimately familiar with the ongoing endeavours in this field. Julie, who do you have with you? Hi, it's good to see you.
This is Asia Now.
Hello, it's 2 p.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 11:30 in New Delhi and 1 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Angela Lim. At this hour, India's Supreme Court set to hear a petition filed by Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal. The key opposition leader is challenging his arrest last month on charges of money laundering linked to the state's now scrapped liquor policy. Global powers urge restraint from Israel after Iran's drone and missile attack. Washington warns Tel Aviv it will not take part in any retaliatory strikes amid fears of a wider war in the region. And German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in China seeking to de-risk Berlin's trade relationship with Beijing. His visit comes as the EU probes claims of unfair competition involving Chinese EVs in European markets. India's Supreme Court is expected to hear a plea on one of the country's most high-profile political arrests today. Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal has approached the top judicial body, challenging a High Court decision.
This is Asia Tonight.
And good evening, I'm Lo Kui-Su. Tonight's top stories. Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong to step down a month from now, handing over the reins of office to DPM Lawrence Wong. World leaders counselling restraint from Israel after the weekend's attack by Iran as the Israeli War Cabinet holds a fierce debate to decide on its response. The Philippines caps, for now, further access to army bases for U.S. forces after expanding last year available sites to 9 from 5. India's Supreme Court adds an extra week of jail time for a key leader of the opposition. Arvind Kejriwal no longer free to campaign before national polls start this week. And the German Chancellor in China says competition in trade is welcome as long as it is fair. Olaf Scholz to add to recent calls from the US and France for Chinese clarity on Russia's war in Ukraine. And another stabbing incident in Sydney 2 days after 6 people were killed in a knifing spree in the same city. A black ribbon has been projected onto the sails of the Sydney Opera House, paying tribute to victims of Saturday's rampage. The United States spurring plans to revitalize production of semiconductors by luring Asian tech giants. It's offered $6.4 billion to Samsung for a chip plant in the United States, days after granting a multi-billion-dollar handout to TSMC. And in another win for Samsung, the South Korean firm has toppled Apple from its perch as the world's largest phone manufacturer after a slump in iPhone shipments. Our Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong will step down from office exactly a month from now in what has been a widely anticipated leadership succession. Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, who was earlier appointed the leader of the so-called fourth generation political team, will take over.
A great night's sleep, night after night after night. That is the difference. The difference is temper.
Time, brought to you by Temper.
This is Singapore Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Dawn Tan. Tonight's top stories. The date is set for the nation's leadership transition. PM Lee hands over the reins to Lawrence Wong on the 15th of May, and he urges Singaporeans to give Mr. Wong and his 4G team their full support. DPM Wong also pledging to give his all in his new role as tributes pour in, thanking PM Lee for his dedication and guidance and the legacy that he's left for the nation and beyond. The leaders of Singapore and New Zealand pledged to strengthen resilience in their supply chains, part of their enhanced partnership as both nations mark 60 years of diplomatic relations. A new registry launched for companies to report their carbon emissions more easily and accurately. That's thanks to a database that helps businesses convert their activities into greenhouse gas emissions. And a $40 million boost announced at the Philanthropy Asia Alliance to extend the focus from education and poverty alleviation to the sustainable use of natural resources and the effects of climate change. And in your Asia Business Update, private home sales blaze higher in March. We find out how new launches are adding fuel to the fire. Plus, more businesses in Singapore ready to consider job sharing, a flexible work arrangement that could see more people hired and working shorter hours. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong will step down from office exactly a month from now in what has been a widely anticipated leadership succession. Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, who was earlier appointed leader of the so-called fourth generation political team, will take over.
This is World Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Rani Samtani. Tonight's top stories. Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong to step down a month from now, handing over the reins of office to DPM Lawrence Wong. Fears of a military response after Iran's attack on Israel, Tel Aviv's war cabinet locked in a heated debate on when and how to react. Donald Trump's long-awaited hush money trial is underway in New York. The historic case marks the first time a former U.S. president has faced a criminal trial. The Philippines caps for now further access to Army bases for U.S. forces after last year nearly doubling the number of sites to 9. India's Supreme Court adds an extra week of jail time for a key opposition leader. Arvind Kejriwal unable to campaign ahead of national polls that open on Friday. Also tonight, a 15-year-old arrested in Australia for stabbing multiple people inside a church in Western Sydney. The incident comes just 2 days after the city was rocked by a mass stabbing in a busy shopping mall. Plus, Malaysian authorities arrest the suspect in the shooting at Kuala Lumpur International Airport after an hours-long manhunt. Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong will step down from office exactly a month from now in what has been a widely anticipated leadership succession. Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, who was earlier appointed the leader of the so-called fourth-generation political team, will take over.